Hello and welcome to this very special event with West Sussex Library Service and best-selling author Cathy Mincin-Brink. My name is Katie and I'm Principal Librarian for the Reading and Engagement team, and I join you tonight from a very festive Goring Library in Worthing. We're absolutely thrilled to welcome you to this digital event. This is only our second Zoom event, so do bear with us as we navigate this new way of hosting authors online. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions in advance of tonight. I'll be including some of those in our conversation, and I'll also do my best to ask any that come through on the Q&A. Some of you who are joining us might have been taking part as a result of being part of our online virtual reading group, or you might have taken part in the Mid-Sussex Reading Challenge this year. So I would just like to say a very warm welcome to our guests who have joined us through that. We really appreciate the way in which our reading community have engaged with books this year. More than ever, I think we've all relied on books to get us through these difficult months and to find ways to engage with each other through isolation. And it's just been a really lovely experience to connect with you all through books this year. We feel very privileged to have Cathy with us tonight, especially in a week when she's just announced news of her first novel, Everyone is Still Alive, which is being published next July. It feels like we have had inadvertently gained a scoop, as this may be the first event where she is able to talk about this new book. Cathy is the author of the wonderful memoir, The Last Act of Love, which was published to great acclaim in 2015. She went on to write A Manual for Heartache and speaks and writes regularly on life, death, love, literature and mental health, and is often found to be doing book events like these at festivals in shops, libraries and some prisons. Having worked for the Bookseller magazine, the reading agency, Quick Reads and Waterstones, and in addition to becoming a published writer and creative writing tutor, Cathy is very well placed to talk books. This is exactly what she does in her latest book, Dear Reader, which is an uplifting love letter to the comfort and joy of books and the sheer pleasure of being an avid reader. So I'd like to welcome Cathy to West Sussex Libraries.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. It's very, very nice to be here indeed.
Lovely. Well, can I start by just asking you to set the scene and tell us a little bit about your latest book, Dear Reader?
Yes, so Dear Reader, so it is a book about books and reading, because I realised at some point, there's all these ways that we talk about our identity, aren't there? And I realised at some point that there were various things I could say about myself, but actually the truest thing I think I could ever say about myself is that I'm a reader. It's the thing that feels the most, it's both the thing I had control over. You know, I'm a daughter, but that wasn't a decision I made, that's just a thing. But being a reader is something that's been lifelong. I don't remember not being a reader. It's been lifelong, it's been constant. I think it will always be true. And it just felt like the truest thing that I could ever think or say about myself. And I wanted to explore it a bit. And I wanted to explore the way books have been so important to me. And I genuinely think have kept me and carried me through difficult times and continue to do so. I've been writing this book now I'm sort of writing it. I tend not to write one thing at a time, which I wouldn't recommend actually, it's awful. I keep ending up doing it. So I don't sort of start a book, finish a book, then write another book. I tend to be writing them at the same time, often thinking like, oh, is anything going to come of this? So I have been writing it over the last 3 years. And of course, as it turned out, I think it is very relevant to these times. But I finished it pre-pandemic. But lots of people say to me, oh, it's so perfect for the pandemic. Well done you for writing it so quickly. And that's just not true at all. It's complete. Well, I think it's because I live thinking something terrible's around the corner. So that just happened to be true, sadly. But that tends to be the way that I think. So.
And did you always intend to write it in that kind of chronological way and to have the book recommendations at the end of each of your kind of life chapters?
I really struggled with the structure of it. What I wanted it to be was I wanted it to replicate, because the other thing as well is I was writing a novel and stuck with it, as in I was stuck. No, I was sticking with writing the novel, I was stuck. And I was feeling really nostalgic about being a bookseller. and the which I must say as well, now that I'm not a bookseller anymore, I look at it through rose-tinted spectacles, because actually it's often hard work and the public can sometimes not be very nice. But now that I don't do it, I've forgotten all of that. So in my mind, it's just the most beautiful halcyon experience where you spend all day having wonderful conversations with strangers about books. And that's what I wanted to try to replicate in book form, the idea of me in my dream bookshop, and that the reader would be the customer coming in off the street, which I think sounds very nice, but actually doing that proved structurally harder than I thought. So I started trying to do it all out of order. One of my ideas was to do it was write about a different book every week for a year. That was just very hard, because even planning out how the books would go was a bit beyond me. I'm not very structurally clever, I don't think, so I struggled with that. And then eventually I just thought, it might be my editor actually, or maybe I just thought, you know what, let's just start from the beginning and write it chronologically. I always knew I wanted to have lots of book recommendations, and I knew the way I wanted to do it. I knew I wanted to have a chapter of prose and then a list of books. And my idea was that the list of books would replicate a dump bin like you get in a bookshop or in a library, those little stands where you've got a book across the top. And that, well, you know, my favorite thing about being a bookseller, apart from talking to strangers, was setting up those displays. So that was part of it as well. I kind of just thought maybe I could write something where I just sort of endlessly set up those displays.
It's such a clever idea. It's just brilliant. So yeah, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of reading the book, you'll get a chapter on, you know, Kathy's childhood, and then you get a list of brilliant recommendations of children's books, or you get, you know, she talks about I don't know, growing up in a pub, and then you get lots of recommendations of books that feature pubs or landlords or whatever. And it's just, yeah, it's such a brilliant way of framing it. And also you come away from reading this book with just the biggest pile of books that you want to go and explore. And when you see a book mentioned in it that you have read, then that's lovely too, because it kind of reminds you and brings back the book that you've enjoyed. So yeah, it's a really lovely device. I wondered whether you had any categories. You've got things like posh people behaving badly, and you've got some brilliant kind of themes. I wondered if there are any that didn't make it into the book that you had in mind.
Yeah, because I do think it is a really lovely way to do it, and I think it works really, really well. But actually, even doing it that way was a lot harder than I thought, because the thing of matching the lists thematically to the preceding chapter, and then deciding where which book was going to go. So some of my favourite books could have fitted in several different categories. My editor as well was a bit... I utterly adore my editor. She's the best person in the world. She's called Francesca Main, and she's amazing. And I say that because I quite like to, and she really is, she's a wonderful human being. So I quite like to sort of, as a joke, say things like, oh, my editor was a bit bossy about this. But I feel it's very important that I explain she's not bossy at all. I completely respect her opinion. She's always right. So my editor was quite firm with me about not replicating, you know, I kept trying to put the books by the same author in different categories, and she'd be like, I think we've had enough Jilly Cooper now. And it's like, never. I kept trying to I put Nora Lofts in several places. And she made an editorial note at one point which said, I think Nora Lofts is getting slightly too much airtime. So there was that sort of thing. So Nora Lofts ended up in pub books, but she could have gone in other categories. And then there were books that are real favourites of mine, but they got chopped out because I lost the category. So there were books. One, I was going to write about stopping drinking, which I did a few years ago. Books are really important to that. And then I just decided against it. But that meant that I had Rachel's Holiday by Marian Keyes in, which is one of my favourite books. And again, I think a really good example of how, I think Marian Keyes as an author is a great example of how very sort of enjoyable, very commercial, in some ways quite light books, but actually dealing with really serious subjects often, but in a really enjoyable and accessible way. So I feel sad that I kind of almost didn't really, and then in the sort of the flurry of editing it was only after, I sort of would wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, I never put Rachel's Holiday in somewhere. One of my favourite books is Love Nina by Nina Stibbe.
Oh yeah.
You know, she's become a great friend of mine, so we see each other a lot. And I had that book in loads of places. but ended up somehow not having it anywhere, because I did have a category of books that made me laugh out loud, which that does.
Yeah.
And I never put it anywhere else. And then I did at one point have a rule about not having books by friends or people I knew, but then I kept breaking that rule. But in some cases, I've sort of kept the rule. So it's sort of a bit, it's a bit funny. Like I would break the rule, and then later on I think, depending on when I did it, I might think, oh, I can't have that because I'm too close to that author. But then later on, I'd have an author to whom I'm equally close. But but I didn't want to be, it's not supposed to be definitive. I'm not a definitive person anyway. I have very few convictions outside of the fact that we should try to be really nice and kind to each other and not do bad things. So I'm not saying like, these are the best books ever, or these are the books you must read. It's supposed to be an idiosyncratic wander through reading. And I wanted it to be fun. I knew I wasn't going to be sort of pontificating about what literature is, or I wanted to talk about Jilly Cooper and Hilary Mantel like in the same way, rather than think that they were different animals.
Yeah, and I think that really comes across. There's not an ounce of kind of literary snobbery or anything. It's just like a really joyous celebration of all kinds of books, which actually is how most of our reading lives are, isn't it? That you know, and you need different books for different moods and different times of day and all of that kind of stuff. So I think, I love the way that those books are kind of put next to each other in exactly the same way. What really comes through is sort of the comfort you find often in rereading books. And we had a question in advance from James, who wanted to know which books you go back to and reread purely for comfort. And it felt reading this book that there was a lot of those featured.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I'm a huge rereader. It always amazes me that people don't, because I think I'm such a rereader that reading really for me is I'm just auditioning books to see if books I reread. Though sometimes I read a book and I think it's very good, but I know that I don't want to read it again. That would be something probably that's a bit disturbing or difficult. But mainly I just love to reread, and I race through books on the first outing, and then and like halfway through I'll be thinking like, oh, I'm so looking forward to when I reread this, but I'm speeding up now to get through the story. But comfort reading specifically, books I go back to, The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, and Love in a Cold Climate as well. Not quite so much, but I still do really like that. I've actually got a thick omnibus of Nancy Mitford's novels, and I tend to read through that, even though I'm afraid with her novels, I think they get progressively worse. So the best one is The Pursuit of Love. Well, actually, that's not her first novel, so that made no sense. She wrote some sort of starter novels before the war, but then of her career starting with The Pursuit of Love, that's the best, and then they sort of dwindle off. But although I don't even think the later ones are very good, like The Blessing and Don't Tell Alfred, I will read them when I'm poorly. So I particularly like Map and Lucia by E.F. Benson. Again, very, very funny. So I tend to like things that are elegant and funny. I really like Georgette Heyer, who's known for her Regency romances, but I think she should be seen more as a historical P.G. Wodehouse, because she's very funny. And again, they're just very elegant. And although they are sort of romances, but you never feel she, the writer's, particularly bothered about it. It's just a container with which to explore an interesting world, I think, which is probably why I like them. Because out of the books that I don't like, I wouldn't say I do like romance, really. I'm not really massively interested in that. Though whenever I say I don't like this, I don't think, well, then why is one of Pride and Prejudice one of my favourite books? I'd say Pride and Prejudice is a social comedy, really, rather than a romance.
Yeah.
Pride and Prejudice when I'm feeling low in body or mind. So lots of Jane Austen, and quite often classic crime. So Agatha Christie, Neo Marsh, that sort of thing. Again, books I've read a million times before that I could probably, somebody wanted me, I could probably now pretty much recite, say, The Mysterious Affair at Star. Tell the story. So it's just, but I think it's just the comfort is in just in familiarly moving my eyes across the page and knowing that everything will be okay.
And you talk in the book about kind of when you reread things like Adrian Mole's diary, how depending on what age you are in your life, you kind of then relate to different characters. And I've often thought that when I come to a book, it depends what's kind of going on with me. So I'm a different reader, even if it's still the same book. And you know, once you've had kids, you start to relate to maybe the parents, or you look at the children in a different way, or, you know, and I sort of think, gosh, I'll be, you know, relating to the older characters. So I think that's another sort of thing with rereading. And you reread with your son as well, because presumably you're going back and rereading some of these children's books that you read as a child with him. Have there been any that you've kind of gone back to and felt differently about as an adult?
Well, I don't like being negative about books, I must say, but I'm afraid I'll brace myself to do it. I just really don't think Enid Blyton stands up. So books that I adored when I was little, they just don't do it for me at all. I find them, they just don't, I just get very little pleasure out of them, sadly. Whereas, for example, Biggles, I still find, you know, Biggles is great. And Narnia as well, the Narnia books, I still think are wonderful. I know sometimes people do get, when I say about Narnia, people get wound up about the fact that there's this sort of religious messaging in it. But I think it's completely up to you whether you even choose to notice that. I certainly didn't notice it as a girl, and still now don't really notice it. It's sort of like an added thing. So, and I still really love the Anne of Green Gables, the Anne books by L.M. Montgomery, and they grow on me. They are, some of them are quite sentimental, and the Rilla of Ingleside, which is set during the First World War, the sort of the unquestioning patriotism sits oddly with a modern sensibility, but I still love the books. And again, they I'd say are social comedies more than anything else. So social comedy, even though I'm not quite sure fully what I mean by that, might be my favourite genre of book, I think. And I love reading things with Matt. I like his view on things. He likes Agatha Christie's as well, but again, he would rather than read them aloud to him, he would rather I tell him the story. So that, I must say, that's why I've got very good at, I could hire myself out to tell Agatha Christie's to people, because I've been doing it a lot over the past 3 years.
I think there could be a market for that. That sounds like
Well, if I'm ever in any kind of a hostage situation and we don't have devices and we don't have books, I definitely feel I could be the person that just tells books to people.
That's what you could bring to the table. I think that's it. I would like to be with someone who has that ability. Yeah. And how have you found reading over lockdown? I know some of our borrowers have found the time to kind of tackle the big books that they're always meant to read, and then lots of people have been telling us that they found it hard to concentrate, and particularly on anything new, and that they, I don't know, this year with all the, I think your book talks really nicely about when there's so much bad news and everything, that the best antidote to all that doom scrolling is to just squirrel away with a book. But did you find that was affected by?
It was initially, and then I just barred myself off news, really. So right back at the beginning, my husband and I were watching those daily press conferences. Also, I'd let myself go on, I know that too much social media is really bad for me. And when I say too much, I mean more than like a little bit. But it was so weird, wasn't it, at the beginning of lockdown? I just I felt like, I'll tell you what I felt like. I felt like a bobbin on a sewing machine. And I'd been like running along in an efficient, disciplined way, knowing what was good for me and what was bad for me, and doing the things that are good for me and not doing things that are bad for me. And then lockdown happened, and I'd been teaching the week before, which was so delightful and beautiful, with all these lovely people, and I held it together through all of that, and then that stopped, and suddenly I just went, my bobbin sort of went like and I mean, I didn't start drinking again, so that's the good thing, but I did lose all my good habits and just stared at my phone for ages. We were watching those press conferences. I was getting really wound up. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I was starting to feel really anxious, really sick, and then I said to my husband, I've got to stop doing this. I've got to, so I think I did 4 or 5 days of that and started feeling really, really insane. And then after that, I said to him, just, tell me what I need to know, but otherwise I don't want to be watching it. And that's largely been what I've done, really. And I find if I'm doing that, then I have mental space to read. But if I lose my discipline around things like social media, then and I've read quite a lot of science about it. It's quite interesting. It's like, those devices are designed to capture our attention. So if the dopamine flush of the bright lights on social media is on offer, then it's really difficult to convince yourself to go for the more sustaining, longer term gratification of reading Anna Karenina, say. But what I find is, if I bar myself off it's not dissimilar to not drinking alcohol, actually. If I'm just not allowed it, then I think the glass of water with the slice of lemon in is really delicious. But it is, and it's better for me. It's more sustaining, and I do find that when I consume the world through news and through social media, I very quickly can become really despairing, which again is no good. There's no good to anybody if I'm debilitated by what I'm consuming. Whereas if I engage in long form narrative, I feel entirely different. So for example, over the summer, again, every time I looked at the news, it just felt so difficult and awful. But I read a book called Humankind by Rutger Bregman, which is a great fat book. And it's about optimism, really, and how, again, I felt it confirmed everything I think about why watching the news can be so bad and destabilizing for us. And I also read Black and British by David Olusoga. And the content of both books was what I was thinking about, what I was preoccupied by, what was sort of depressing me when I was consuming that subject matter via Twitter. But reading it in a crafted long form narrative felt like an entirely different experience, and one that felt very nourishing and worthwhile. So that was, again, just quite a good reminder that for me, it's really important to read like that. So I think of social media reading. I mean, it's still reading, isn't it? We read it, but it's kind of mental candy floss or poisonous candy floss or something. I think it's very good for me. I do a tiny bit because, of course, I mean, the thing is, it is nice. That's, addictive things have to be nice usually. Right? You don't want to do them. So I like the meeting. I like seeing people, because otherwise life can feel quite small. But yeah, I don't feel it's good for me. Whereas reading, I definitely feel is good for me.
Yeah, we've also found lots of people have found audiobooks have been quite a good way of consuming books when maybe they haven't got the concentration levels, and if you've been, taking the dog for a walk, or maybe, doing your daily exercise or whatever. So I know you mentioned a few audiobooks in your Dear Reader. You talk about Time Traveller's Wife, don't you, when your son is very little.
Yeah.
I wondered if you had any other good audio recommendations.
In fact, I had a list of audio recommendations, and again, somehow that got edited out because I lost the chapter that went with it. Rebecca, unabridged, read by Anna Massey. Absolutely gorgeous. And because it's quite a short book, even unabridged, it's 12 or 13 hours. So one of the things I quite like to do with audiobooks is, if I do need to do things like clean the house or declutter or get stuff done, then pretty much the only way that that's not a torture to me is to have an audiobook on the go. And if I choose something quite long, then I'll get really efficient. So I would potentially think, actually, I'll have 12 hours of audio over this weekend, and I will, and then I'll have a long list of jobs and I'll really enjoy doing them. The Bell Jar, which is read by Maggie Gyllenhaal. Not sure if I've said her name right. One utterly brilliant. The sort of her limpid tones are just magnificent. What else do I like? I also really like sort of BBC dramatisations. So I've got Noel Coward and Agatha Christie. I've also got Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Cage Birds Sing, read by herself, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Her voice is spectacular. And what else? I do like a bit of P.G. Wodehouse for light relief.
I think talking to somebody this week who recommended to me The Switch by Beth O'Leary, who wrote Flatshare.
Yeah.
The audio of that's really good. I think Alison Steadman plays the grandmother, who the young character swaps life with. I think the grandmother's up in Yorkshire and in a sort of very small village, and then the daughter is in a sort of trendy part of Shoreditch or something, and I don't know what the premise is for them swapping lives, but she said that was a really fun audiobook, so I'm going to seek that.
I think it's nice when you get an audiobook that has two, that has more narrators. One that's also quite interesting. But yeah, I just love audio. And again, if I'm feeling, if I am feeling poorly, and it's never that I don't want to read, but sometimes increasingly my eyesight's a bit of a problem. So sometimes I will get headaches. So it's not that I don't want to read, it's that I know I'll carry on getting iller and iller and iller until I can stop reading. So the way I do that is I put myself to bed with an audiobook and lie there with my eyes shut. It's quite funny because in what my aunt used to, my great aunt, we used to visit from Ireland and be very disapproving, and she always used to say I would ruin my eyes with the books, and she disapproved as well. She'll ruin her eyes and her morals. But I don't know about the morals, but I think she might be right with the eyes, because I do think the only downside to my reading is I needed reading specs earlier than most people my age, and I do feel that I just find it very, well, I'll get a headache and I'll carry on reading and it'll get worse and worse and worse and worse, and then eventually I kind of can't see, and that doesn't feel very sensible. Marilla, in that thing of changing how old you are when you read books, changing it. So of course when I first read Anne of Green Gables, I was younger than Anne of Green Gables. And now the character I identify with is Marilla, who adopts Anne and who is having all these problems with her eyesight. So that's what I've become.
It's funny, isn't it? And I was going to ask you about, in Dear Reader, there's various points in your life where you start writing novels. You start writing a novel when you're in America, and you start imagining novels when you're working in a bookshop, and potential bookshop heroines who might, meet a man at an event or go on to solve a crime, and had all these sort of potential novel ideas, which all sounded good to me. But then we found out this week that you do have a novel coming out. So can you tell us a little bit about your new book?
Finally finished it. So I've pretty much always been writing a novel. Starting giving up. And when I say always, I think from the time I could wield a pen, I was writing some kind of story. Yeah, and I finally finished one. And I'll be 48 next month. I'll be 48 when it comes out. I sort of like that. I really like teaching writing now. And the thing I am always saying to people, not that I want to put people off, I want to encourage people, but I think there's a myth in our culture that writing's easy, and that if you're talented enough, it'll be easy. Whereas what I think about it is it just takes a long time. It takes a very, very, very long time, and it takes a lot of effort, a sustained effort. It takes a lot of focus. And really the whole thing of, why I've managed to complete a novel is because I just haven't given up. That's the reason why I've managed to, which sounds very obvious, doesn't it? I didn't finish all those other novels because I gave up on them. This time I haven't given them up. But it's true. It's not that I haven't wanted to give up, but it's that I haven't given up. I've sort of pushed through. So it's called Everyone is Still Alive. It's set in a street in West London near the Thames. And it's about a woman called Juliet who's married to a writer called Liam. They have a little boy called Charlie. And the novel opens with them moving into her dead mother's house. And then it goes on kind of over the course of a year, and the book cover, which everybody can now look at because it was revealed yesterday. I'll tell you a nice story about that. I dreamt that book cover.
Oh, wow.
I know. So the best thing about writing books, because I find it I find it very lonely. That's my problem with it. I love teaching. I like being with people. The amount of time you have to spend alone to write a book is a lot, and I find that difficult. But then what I like about it, the closer you get to finishing it, the more it involves other people. So I really like, I adore my editor, I love my agent, I love all the people at the publishers. And when they start doing things like saying like, oh, I'm going to brief the jacket, this and this, that's all very, very, very exciting. So they sent a first cut of ideas for the jacket. And they were street scenes, and they were okay. I didn't sort of like massively fall in love with any of them, which was the same process for my first book as well. And then a few nights later, I dreamt I dreamt what the book cover looked like, and I dreamt it as that it would be the type going down the middle, centered, and that it would be grass, and that on the bottom right hand corner there'd be a child's toy and maybe a book, and then they played around with that. And I sent it to my editor saying, like, I don't know if anything can be done. And she said, well, I'll pass it on to design, but, you know, I wouldn't be too hopeful. Then they sent it back, and then she emailed it to me and said, I think your subconscious may be onto something. So that feels really special. And that bit when the kind of all the words that you've scribbled on the back of fag packets and all the staring out the window and the nail biting and the tearing out of the hair and all that, when that gets to the stage where people have conversations about you, and where wonderful editors are briefing wonderful designers in buildings in London, well, actually I think they're all in their own houses, but that feels like incredibly special and a really huge privilege, and I absolutely don't lose sight of that. I still find that amazing that people do that for me.
That's amazing, because usually you hear that authors have got no say whatsoever in the cover of their book, and it can be quite I mean, it's such an important thing, isn't it, the cover? So that's incredible that you were able to get your vision on the front of it, and it looks great.
And I do think it looks wonderful. So
yeah.
I've always found that it's not, I suppose it probably helps all those years I had book selling, so I think they quite trust me what I think about covers.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And quite often author friends of mine will say, like, oh, I don't like the cover, and then they'll show it to me and I'll say, that's really good. You know, and their idea, again, they haven't spent 10 years watching customers pick up books, so they don't know that. I had a funny thing with my friend recently, who's quite a literary novelist, and he said, I really want to, and I get sent lots of books, which is very nice, and he was around my house and he picked one up, and he said, I love this cover, I'd love something like this for my book, what do you think? And I looked at him and I said, well, only if you don't want anyone to buy it. And then they've gone for something that's a bit less sort of literary and off-putting looking. But I find it all so interesting, that side of things.
Yeah.
And probably that's why it does entrance me so much, because of all those years of being involved professionally, you know, seeing books arrive, and it is miraculous to have some of my own out there.
And I guess it's going to feel quite different talking about this one because it's fiction for the first time, whereas you've been doing, you know, you've always had to talk about yourself, haven't you, in that direct way, the promotion of your
book. And I haven't at all, as you said, this is the first time I've talked about it at all, so I'm not used to it yet, and I don't know how it's going to feel. Of course, it doesn't really matter at the moment because no one's read it, so I'm in that quite nice, this is a really nice time with a book, when I'm still fiddling and editing with it, but it's basically there, you know, it's going to exist, so I'm no longer in that scary part of, like, I've got 25,000 words and I don't know if any of them are any good. That's terrifying. So I'm in this really nice bit now. It exists. My editor thinks it's wonderful. My agent thinks it's wonderful. Anybody who's read any of it thinks it's wonderful. But other people haven't read it. So no one's, you know, when anyone asks a question, they're not going to say, like, oh, but that bit in chapter 4 when X says whatever to Y, I thought that was totally realistic. And then I'll go, oh, you know. So it's that kind of thing. But I hopefully I will enjoy it. I'll tell you something that's happened that slightly surprised me. I made quite a minor character Dutch because I wanted to have a European, because I thought, well, there'd definitely be a European living on this street. And so I get one of the husbands of one of the characters, I thought, I'll make him Dutch. And I said to my husband, Erwin, the Dutchman, do you mind if I make this guy Dutch? I said, he's not in it all that much because he's going to leave her quite early on in the novel. But, you know, I could make him French, but I just don't know so much. You know, I really know how and then I'll just pinch what you think about Brexit and what have you. So he said, that's fine. Anyway, in that rather miraculous way that happens in fiction when the characters start thinking about themselves, not that I want to give too much away, but he has a much bigger role than I was expecting.
Right.
Not remotely like my husband. I'm only pinching the Dutchness. But now, if I'd known what bigger role he was going to have, I wouldn't have used any of Erwin's characteristics for him. But of course, now I don't want to lose the Dutchness because it's quite a big part for him. So I've got that to contend with. The fact that I've written this, the fact that people might say, you're you're married to a Dutchman and this person in your novel is Dutch, you know, so that sort of thing's all quite fun.
I've had a question from Sarah on the Q&A. She wants to know what books are on your wish list for Christmas.
Oh, that's an excellent question. I do hope I'm going to get them. I want Red Comet, and I can't remember who it's by, but it's about Sylvia Plath.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really thick and scholarly and apparently very good. So I've put that on my Christmas list. And I want Mantelpieces, which is a collection of sort of journalism by Hilary Mantel. I want a book called Hidden London. Again, I don't know who it's by, but it's about tube stations, disused tube stations, which is one of my favourite subjects. And I really want to write a historical novel that has some Second World War tube station action in it. So I put that on it for that. And I'm thinking, this might be a self-gifting thing, but I really love I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, and she wrote several other volumes of autobiography. And I've lost sight. I can't actually remember now. My memory's getting funny. I don't think I've read them all, and I certainly haven't read them in order. I've read bits and bobs over the years. So I'm thinking of getting the whole lot and then maybe reading them in sequence. I like to have a New Year's reading resolution on the go. So maybe starting my year by reading all of them would feel very nice. So that might be a little book present to myself. And somebody has given me today, which I didn't read, because I haven't read it yet. Well, I've read the first bit. So The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman.
Oh, yeah.
So I was very privileged to interview him right at the beginning of the process, because Penguin had an event and they asked me to interview people at the event. So they sent me the first 40 pages of the book, which hadn't come out yet. And I read it and thought it was wonderful and interviewed him, and he was wonderful. And I really looked forward to it, and I was going to be interviewing him more, etc., etc. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. And I've never quite got round to reading the full book because I've been editing my own, doing other things. So that's my big treat. As soon as work's finished, I'm going to read that.
That book has had more reservations, I think, than any other book ever at West Sussex Libraries.
Well, exactly, and I think it's broken all the records. So yeah. I do find it funny that there's almost something funny for me that's kind of the life of a professional reader, though. You read things when you're going to interview someone or because you've got to review them, and then if you don't sort of almost jump on them, and obviously I had the whole thing there and I read it all, but because it wasn't yet available, I only read the beginning. So I'm looking forward to reading the rest.
And on the subject of gifts, is there any books that you recommend that are good to give as gifts at Christmas? Any stocking fillers?
Oh, well, my friend Nina Stibbe has a Christmas book called An Almost Perfect Christmas, which is laugh out loud funny. I really love that. I think some of the classics are good. Again, I like to reread Little Women at Christmas because it always cheers me up. The other thing I'm going to get for someone for Christmas, I should probably whisper this a bit, is the David Olusoga book I mentioned, Black and British. I think there's a teenage or YA version of that.
Right, yeah.
So I'm going to get that to read with Matt. And I like the Wendy Cope's little Christmas poems.
Yeah.
They're little square books. And she hasn't done one this year, but she usually does. She doesn't do one every year, but she's done one quite a lot of years. Some of my favourites are The Christmas Truce, because I've always loved that story in 1914, how the troops stopped fighting and started playing football with each other and showing each other. I find it incredibly moving when I think about it. Of course, they were all children, weren't they? Yeah. Which is that other thing that, when I was first reading the Biggles books, the men in the flying machine seemed so old to me, and whereas now they seem like boys, which they were, So I'm as my son gets older, I'm increasingly moved / devastated at how just at the notion of sending anyone to war, really, that we've ever done it, that we still do it, that works in that way. So sorry, I went off at a tangent there.
No, they're all good recommendations. And
the other good gift, I think, is a book token.
Yeah.
Because actually, the one thing I disagree with in Nina's Christmas book is she says that vouchers of any kind are a lazy present, but I completely don't agree, because my favourite present as a kid was a book token, and it's probably still my favourite present now, because you're giving the gift of the future. So I absolutely adore a book token, and it feels to me to be such a, a luxury and a treat. Just the notion you can go in and get whatever you want.
Yeah, no, I
I'm
totally.
very fond of stationery as well, but I'm quite picky and fussy about it. So obviously quite often bookshops also have really good stationery. So sometimes if I get a book token, I might spend it on, notebooks.
I've got a question from Gail. She says, please can I ask which book Kathy wishes she had written? Thank you.
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I don't think I do really. I've often thought about this because I often see other authors answer it. I'm not sure I do wish I'd written anything. What I'm envious of in other writers is I'm envious of structural ability. So, for example, The Time Traveller's Wife, or Life After Life, or God in Ruins by Kate Atkinson, or The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. Even the thought of it, my head started to throb. I find it so difficult when writing to look at screwed my face up, because that's the way I think of it. I don't really think in a linear way, but something about that I just find it very difficult to organize myself structurally. And that's the thing so what I feel is I've just got all this stuff in the air, and taming that into something on the page that's going to make sense feels very hard. So so that's what I envy in other writers, the ability to conceive of stories like that and put them on the page. Because I feel if I tried to think of stories as complex as that structurally, it might actually go mad in the attempt to write them down, or just sort of end up lying in a puddle in the street crying. And again, with my novel, I tried all sorts of things with it which were more structurally ambitious, but ultimately it opens on a day in August and closes on a day in August a year later, and it just goes like that with very occasional short flashbacks, because I just couldn't handle. My first draft of it was much more Liam, who's the writer, part of it was happening in a book he was writing, which he was sending to Juliet, and they'd split up, and there was all this, but I just couldn't manage it structurally, really. I just did collapse in a heap and had to rethink. So, but I think that's no bad thing to anybody who is writing. I don't think, unless you really feel confident about it, I don't think there's any shame in aiming to be structurally simple with your first books. And actually, I wish somebody had given me that piece of advice. You've got enough going on with the first book without also trying to be structurally ambitious. So that's what I think now. What an interesting question, though. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's a question from Judy, which is sent in advance of tonight, which is, who is your favourite author? Which is a very difficult question. And did that author inspire you to become an author yourself?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I mean, I've got a few, but Julian Barnes, I'm completely obsessed with, and have been for years and years and years and years and years, since I first read him when I was about 16 at sixth form college in Scunthorpe. And it was reading Metroland and then Flaubert's Parrot that really made me want to go and live in France, made me want to be able to speak French. I still think about him all the time. And there's a line, and I think I can't remember which book it is. This is the thing. I think this is the thing with a favorite author. They kind of get into your head. So I used to say, actually, with my first book, The Last Act of Love, which was about the death of my brother, but I could so easily have called that book Talking to Julian Barnes About Dead People in my head. An awful lot of that book happened first in my head as a conversation with Julian Barnes about death. And I think that's the way it happens when you really admire an author, that they sort of live beyond the page for you, probably. So yes, he did inspire me. There's something I think about the clarity of the way that he writes and the questing way that he writes. And then the writer but then he also sort of put me off, not his fault, but I spent years not writing books because I thought I couldn't ever do it as well as Julian Barnes and Hilary Mantel. And then what I found out, and this is the thing I'm always really keen to show anyone who's writing, is you don't have to sound like Julian Barnes or Hilary Mantel. You just have to work at sounding like yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's you've just got to trust that your voice is going to be enough. So sometimes I think there is that thing of, when I read Hilary Mantel, she seems like such a different species from me. She's so good that it can be like, well, why am I trying to write novels? Why don't I just serve literature by offering to clean Hilary Mantel's bathroom? So I often feel that. But actually also then, if I just sit still with that, I'll grow out of that. Because something as well, I think in the best writers, they also encourage you to work. I also find Hilary Mantel, once I get over that bump, I also find her very inspiring to read. She sends me back to the page. She makes me want to write, as does Maggie Nelson, actually, because I read The Argonauts and Bluets fairly recently for the first time. And I went through the same process. They blew me away. I thought, why am I bothering making, rusty marks on pens? Why am I bothering making marks on paper when this woman exists in the world? And then thought, actually, it's not like a competition thing. I don't have to worry that she's better than me. And then after that, I just found like a new bit of my brain had opened up, really. And I wanted to, again, she sort of sent me back to the page. So I think that's probably that's what my favorite writers do. I think they kind of encourage me on. And when I hear from people who've read my books and say that it's making them write, I think that's a huge compliment and it makes me feel very happy.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a question here from Liz Royal. She says, "Dear Reader was a fascinating read, so thank you, Cathy. I take for granted the ability to read and enjoy books. However, in this book, through Cathy's own story, there is the reminder that the ability to read and enjoy books is not universal. How can we ensure everyone has the opportunity to learn how to read?"
Well, it's very important, isn't it? Of course, so my dad only learned to read and write as an adult. And that was because he, his mother died when he was 8, the family collapsed. He stopped going to school because he was being teased for being poor and dirty. And I think it's been a great privilege, I think, for me to have him as my dad, because he's a great storyteller and he's very intelligent. So quite often running a literacy charity, as I used to do, or coming across people who are professionally involved in literacy, it's difficult for them to get their head around why people might not be able to read. And whereas I never had to make that leap. I always felt like I was on the same side as, not any different from the people I was working with. And in terms of what we do about it, that's also tricky. I think one of the things I always feel is important is I sometimes felt that that my very passion for reading could potentially be a bit off-putting, because if you have managed to reach middle age without reading and writing, you've had some scarring experiences along the way. Education's been tough. You've often felt you were stupid. It's not something that you see as a pleasure. And I think sometimes in a very well-meaning way, that sort of like rah, 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 if only people knew how brilliant reading was, wouldn't they all do it? That can be tricky and it's complex. And I used to struggle with this in my charity, because basically to get funding, you have to say something like, everybody's life would be improved by reading, and then they would be less likely to commit crimes or be a drain on society. I know how to make them read, so please give me some money. And you kind of just had to say that to try to get funding, whereas I always really wanted to point out how difficult and complex it was, because it really is, because you're often dealing with a lot of other things. But there's lots of good work that happens, and it's definitely been the most moving and privileged bit of my life, really, to be in prison and help change someone's mind a bit about reading and story. And then also encourage people to think that they can write their own stories as well. That's a really big one. So, and I think it's quite good just to be aware of it as a privilege. I quite like that idea of, sometimes we do take for granted what we have. And I remember when I went to South Korea on a trip with the British Council to talk to librarians and literacy workers. And it was really fascinating to be talking about literacy in a situation where I was surrounded by an alphabet that I couldn't understand. And then you think like, whoa, yeah, this is a really good example of what this feels like. And I find it quite interesting because I speak a bit of Dutch, but not that much. So whenever I'm in Holland with my husband, again, I'm always in a situation where I don't fully understand. I think it's quite good for us to be put into those situations. It just gives us an interesting mental, flexibility, to know what it feels like not to be up to speed with things, and I think often to recognize as well that if people are being difficult, there might be something that undersits it. I think giving people the benefit of the doubt is such a huge and important thing. It feels to me we've really lost sight of it at the moment, but that's what I always try to do, because my dad still, I mean, he reads now very well, and he can make shopping lists and do crosswords, but he couldn't write a page of sentences with full stops and capital letters in the right place. And he's a very, very lovely man. But if he was, say, well, he kind of wouldn't put himself in the situation. He's still a bit scared of shops because his sisters used to send him to steal milk when he was a kid. So he still feels nervous in shops, doesn't like banks, that kind of thing. So if he was in a situation and was in some way challenged or feel offered, he would be a bit chippy and defensive, but that would be why. And I think it's that's important sometimes. If someone's behaving oddly, is there a way in which you can just think, well, I don't know what's going on with that person. Maybe I can just give them the benefit of the doubt or make some kind of intervention if I can. But, so I think that sort of thing as a citizen level almost is that, that we can do that's important. And then there are volunteering things that you can get involved in.
Yeah, I really like the bit in the book where you talk about trying to do a parallel park and kind of feeling really flustered, and then trying to sort of relate that to how someone might feel if you've been asked to read aloud. And that really spoke to me as someone who quite often gets quite flustered doing parallel parks, and I thought that was a good way of looking at it.
Isn't it, what we feel confident about and what we don't feel confident about?
Yeah.
Like I said, the only thing that stops me reading is if my headache is so enormous that I can barely focus anymore. But again, I have to be on quite good form to get in a car. So, whereas most of the people I've met that aren't very literate are really good drivers, and I often talk about that in prisons because it used to make people laugh a lot. And then they'd say, like, you'd be no good as a getaway driver. I said, no. I'd still be stalling on the hill start.
Well, we know we've got a library at Ford Prison, and we also have all the sort of quick reads and things in our libraries. So we do know what a difference, they do really make to people. Without blowing our own trumpet, I did think I would ask you about your opinions on libraries and the place that they've sort of played for you in your life. If you could speak about libraries.
I'd love to speak about libraries. So, of course, a lot of my first experience of books were libraries, and when we moved to Yorkshire when I was 5 and we signed up at Snaith Library, and we also my mum accidentally stole a book from Redruth Library, we moved quite suddenly, and in the kerfuffle she took it with her. It's called A Walk in the Park by Anthony Brown, and it's a really fun book about class really, but about how we're all the same. My mum says she still wakes up in the night feeling guilty about that book. But I love libraries, and I might just cry thinking about it. I think the huge social achievement of libraries in this country, and then how we've screwed that up, the huge social achievement of it is amazing. It's something to be so proud of, and then so distressing how we've screwed that up over the last few years, and how quick people are to want to get rid of it. I think it's such a wonderful thing, and I remember and it's a wonderful thing in all ways, I think, library access. And I've always felt it's very important to, because I can afford to buy books now. But I think it's really important that we don't think that libraries are only for people that have no other options, because certainly my ideal society, if I could choose my society as I would like it to be, libraries would be really prominent in it. And they would be also linked with providing other social benefits. I think, I worry a lot about people. I think the technology gap is extremely important. So I just think the fact that you can have computer buddies in libraries, that it would make lots of sense to match up the library with the place that people can go for community support. I feel very fortunate, of course. I'm quite well resourced. I'm not great at technology, but I can make it work and I can access it. But I just find it incredibly hard to think about people that can't. And I think modern life is hard. I think about this a lot. And my life isn't particularly hard. My life's very privileged in lots of ways, but still, I find modern life really difficult. I find getting locked out of my banking app really hard. I find paying bills really difficult. Paying tax is unbelievably difficult and distressing. Not the handing over the money, but the filling in, being able to work out how to get on the government website. I find, I mean, it might sound mad, but I'm sure if anybody else does these things, it will resonate. The homework app my son has for school, I find it so stress-inducing and difficult to work it out and to make him do it. And I just think all those things, they build up and they get on top of you a bit. And as I say, I kind of like know what I'm doing, and none of these things should be as hard as they are. And then I think, well, if this is hard for me, what is this like for someone who doesn't have the skills or doesn't have the money to buy a new computer if one breaks, or doesn't have people they can ask for help, or isn't confident in the first place? And it just feels to me that libraries can help with all of that, as well, of course, as being the repository of great pleasure and all the knowledge. I really miss the library. I go to my local library a lot, and it hasn't been open over lockdown. And I was talking to my husband about it the other day, how much I miss the sort of it's like the random nature of it. So it's not, I can afford, if I wanted something specific, I could afford to buy it. But what I like about the library is going in and just following my nose and seeing where I end up, and then taking a couple of things out. Not to own, just to borrow. I think it's the most beautiful and perfect thing, and should be cherished.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one last question because it's time now, but Annie has put a question in which is very specific. She wants to know, have you read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig?
I have read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and I enjoyed it very much, and it was very much up my street because I love books about books, obviously, and I also love, it's not quite this, but it's kind of a little bit the same as the Kate Atkinson books, that notion of being offered different paths, and you choose one path and it leads you off in a different direction from another path. In case anyone hasn't read it, because of course lots of people have read Matt Haig books, but my favourite novel of his is Still the Humans.
Yeah, that's great, isn't it?
So brilliant and funny. And yeah, that's still my favourite book of his. I love it so much, and I was thinking about it the other day and thinking, I really fancy when I read The Midnight Library, I thought that was very good. I thought, and I really fancy rereading The Humans.
And if you do like books about books, you've got a good list of books about books and books about libraries and books about reading in Dear Reader, haven't you? You kind of got...
No, I can't keep off them. I tried ever so hard not to put a writer in my novel, but I just could, because again, there are too many writers in novels, and every time you pick up a novel and the writer's written about a writer, I think like, I write about someone else. I tried so hard not to do it, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it. So I was a writer.
No, I love books about books. I think everyone loves books about books, so that's all good. So it's come to 8 o'clock, so we need to draw to a close already. But a huge thank you to everyone who's come along this evening and who's asked questions, and a particular thank you to you, Kathy, for sparing us your time this evening. When at a time of year when everyone's feeling overwhelmed and probably not feeling like sitting in front of a laptop talking. So thank you very much. It's been a really wonderful conversation. We've got such a lovely community of engaged readers in West Sussex. So if you are somebody who's taken part in our virtual reading group this year, or participated in a reading challenge, or just supported the local library by borrowing books, then we really do appreciate your support. If you've managed to tune into this without yet being a member of our library service, then can we please encourage you to do so? You can join online, and it's quick and easy to do. And it will give you access to lots of brilliant books, including lots of the ones we've talked about tonight, and Kathy's books as well. And do join us in our virtual reading group on Facebook. I'll add a link in the follow-up email that I send out. It's a place where lots of us swap book recommendations on a daily basis, and it's been a real highlight of the year. We'll also put that list together of any of the books that Kathy's mentioned tonight. I think we have got through lots of different books, so that will be a nice long list. Thank you again to the wonderful Kathy Renson-Brink for joining us this evening. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. I hope you have a really good rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. And thank you everyone for being here. I've enjoyed myself very much.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Have a Merry Christmas.